So, welcome to part 2. This session is entitled The Value of a Liberal Arts Education. And our panelists are all people whom I consider to be experts on the topic and who all have wonderful things to share with you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Paul Wilson. He is the moderator for this panel. You might have noticed on your way in that there's a building named after him on the campus. Whoops, was that my outside voice? Paul has had a long and distinguished career with Trent University. And I will, because his bio is really neat, I'm actually going to read it to you. Okay? And Paul is going to sit there and graciously smile and nod until I'm done. He promised me he would do whatever I told him. So I'm thinking that gives me a lot of leeway. So, Paul graduated from the University of Toronto, I say that quietly, in 1964. He was Trent's Director of Athletics and Recreation from 1966 until 2002. Yes, a long, distinguished career with Trent. He has been and continues to be an active community volunteer and alumni relations ambassador for the university. He was a City of Peterborough alderman from 1985 to 1997, and a member of the Trent Board of Governors from 1999 to 2001. Currently, Paul, you can catch Paul on Cogeco TV. He hosts a political program. These include Local Matters and the Queen's Park Report. He also sits on the panel of the weekly Political Speaking. So I introduce to you Mr. Paul Wilson.
Well, thank you very much. I wondered who you were talking about, actually. But nevertheless, and they only named buildings really after people who are dead. But I am just alive. I think a legitimate question this afternoon to me is, Wilson, what are you doing up there with such a distinguished panel? I can't answer that question. I have no answer. And when I look around the audience, we've got a very distinguished audience. But I must say, I'm honored to be here. I was honored to be asked to do this, and I'm delighted to be here. I think this topic here is actually particularly appropriate because a liberal undergraduate arts education was really one of the founding principles of Trent University. And I just want to say something else there. Tom Simons, the original president, is trying to make each group, and if he arrives here, and I think he will, I think I would ask the panelists to stop so we can welcome him and get him settled. So if you will agree with me, that's what we'll do. So, ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist is a very distinguished Canadian. But let me start with, I knew him as a student. And I think it would be fair to say, Don, you had other interests than academia. And I did know your roommate very well. I didn't know you as well, but you were an icon of those early days because of your ability to pass the exams but appear to do very little. However, since then, Don is now Chancellor of Trent University, the first alumni ever to be hold that position. He is one of the world's leading authorities on innovation, media, and economic and social impact of technology. Don, I can't pronounce those words. I don't know what they mean. And that award has been given to him for a number of years by Thinkers 50, a well-respected magazine. He's an adjunct professor at the Global School of Management at York University. He's authored at least, if not more, 15 books that are very widely read. And his latest book, called New Solutions for a Connected Planet, this has been described by the Huntington Post as nothing less than a game plan to fix a broken world. So Don, I think it's terrific to have you here. I think you're so involved in this and also being Chancellor, Mr. Don Tapscott.
Thanks very much, Paul. I walked in the door here and Paul said, "You're going first." And that's what my notes look like. So thankfully there was a long introduction and I have many, many things to say. And I look forward to hearing what I have to say. You know, I'm just reflecting back on those days at Trent. And there's such a sort of intense anxiety amongst students today about what kind of job, and will I get a job, and am I equipping myself for the workforce effectively and for labor markets. And it is a different world, you know, today for young people. And I thought you might all think that I would start off with some platitudes about the value of a liberal arts and sciences education, but I think we do need to recognize that there have been many changes. When I was at Trent, I don't ever remember thinking not only who would hire me, but what my profession was going to be. I was just studying stuff that I loved. And after I graduated from Trent, I wasn't able to do take a bunch of courses that I loved, so I went to McGill for another year and studied another 5 things that I loved. And the economy was good, and we always knew that there'd be a job, and we were more focused on other things, as Paul said. Now, I know he's probably thinking or he's probably left the impression I was focused on, you know, ne'er-do-well activities, but he's right. No, seriously, we had a band, and John Beach, who was in the band, is here, and you know, it's one of the reasons why you have a great undergraduate liberal arts and science education. You get to come to a campus and you get to figure out how to make a band and how to collaborate with others and how to market your band and how to focus on, you know, getting your band done while you still have school and stuff. So that's point number one, is the world has changed. Now I see Bonnie Patterson in the audience, and I'm sure she's thinking, as am I, like, this is Groundhog Day. You know, this discussion. Will this thing ever go away? You know, there's this constant pressure between those who say that a liberal arts and science undergraduate degree is a useless degree, and what we need to do is the purpose of higher education is to equip young people for labor markets and to match a new generation coming into the workforce with the demands of labor markets. And who was at my speech this morning? Could you, okay, a bunch of you. So as I said this morning, I think that there's more to higher education than equipping a young person with the skills they need for their next job. And I'd like to begin with a story that Bonnie knows well. But when I was chairing the capital campaign at Trent, the great Peter Zowski was our chancellor. And Peter and I were having lunch one day, and we were worried. The Harris government was in power, and there was all this talk about useless education, and we were worried that Trent was just going to get shut down or folded into, become the Peterborough campus of Queens or something like that. And if that occurred, that was going to wreck my capital campaign. So I said, what can we do? And he said, well, all the chancellors got together, and we created a statement in defense of a liberal arts education. I said, how'd that go? He said, not well. I mean, it was viewed as self-serving. And I thought about it for a sec, and I asked him, what about if all the high-tech CEOs in Canada made a similar statement? Would Could that be effective? He said, I think that'd be very counterintuitive. I sent out an email to 40 CEOs, and within, what was it, Bonnie, like 48 hours, I got 37 signatures, a statement in defense of a liberal arts education. It was a national news. It was the front page of the Globe and Mail. The Toronto Star did a 2-page spread on it where they interviewed these 37 people. Most of them had an undergraduate liberal arts or science education. And they got emotional about this. They said, we don't need people with skills. We need people who can think and who can solve problems and who can put things in context and who can collaborate and who can understand the big picture, people who are creative and think out of the box. Some of them said we need citizens, not just employees. So was that effective? I don't know. It might have had an impact at the time. Trent's still around. But let's look at the actual issues here. So first of all, as I said this morning, we are moving into a brain economy. And increasingly, we create value by brain rather than by brawn. So if you work in one of the factories of Celestica, I was on the board for many years, an $8 billion electronics manufacturing company. If you're a plant worker, 92% of the plant workers have a university or a college degree. It's about 50-50. And factories are brimming with robots. You're an auto mechanic today. I mean, even an auto mechanic. And we do need people with trades, but cars are basically a whole bunch of computers, and you diagnose cars with software and you fix them by doing software upgrades. I've actually, I've just bought a Tesla, an electric car, and I get a software upgrade every 6 months that just kind of changes the whole car. And it's a big internet appliance, like driving along the highway. So even for traditional labor type jobs, increasingly you do need to have some higher education. Now, if you look at right now, the BC government is saying, no, we're going to focus on skills. And so I ended up in a debate, some of you may have heard, it was on CBC with Anne-Marie Tremonti and The Current. And I went and I looked at the data. Even in Alberta, which is sort of like the poster child for why we need skills, not people who can think, because we're building pipelines and digging, for oil in the ground and all the rest. Of the new jobs in Alberta, over half of them require a university degree, and another 20% require some kind of college education. So there is a growing demand for knowledge. And every kid, if they can afford it and they have a good enough marks, most kids should get some kind of higher education. Now, what about liberal arts per se? Well, there's sort of a bit of a schizoid view amongst employers on this. On the one hand, they hire out of, the big banks and so on, will hire people out of the big commerce schools, Queen's Commerce. But if you talk to them, Ivy School, McGill Commerce, and so on, but if you talk to them, they're saying, well, it's not really the commerce skills we want, those are the hardest places to get into, and we want the smartest kids. And this is a very different thing in the United States. The smartest kids would never dream of taking an undergraduate commerce course, unless, of course, you always wanted to be an accountant. But all the smartest kids go to the Ivies or the little Ivies, like Williams and Amherst and so on. And they get a well-rounded education. Then they do a graduate degree. And in the United States, many more people do graduate degrees than in Canada. So if you have an undergraduate commerce degree and you want to do an MBA at Harvard, forget it. They're not interested in people with commerce or skills. They're not interested in you having skills. They want to know that you studied something for which you have a passion. And if it's Greek, you got a way better chance of getting into a Harvard to do an MBA than if it's a more skills-oriented thing. So we're going to have lots of time to talk. There's so much to talk about, but I just wanted to say one other thing, and that's this so-called skills gap. That's why we need to stream kids into technical stuff, develop their skills as opposed to improving their general capacity to think and to think critically and to be creative and so on. I will say, and we can argue it if you want, I don't think there is a skills gap. The data would suggest that there are spot differences. Like in BC right now, they say they need more pipe fitters than they can hire. There are spot differences like that. But overall, the problem in labor markets in Canada is not a skills gap. It's structural unemployment for young people. There are 200,000 job openings, which is about normal for churn. There are 1.8 million young people who are unemployed. That's the problem. It's not a skills gap. The only skills these kids are missing is experience because they can't get a job. So I think we do young people a great disservice. Now, should we be more cognizant of these big demands of labor markets for certain, professional capabilities? Of course. Should we build a great nursing school? Of course. But also, I think that, as I said, sure, we need science, technology, engineering, math, STEM, but we also need STEAM. I think it'd be great if every person in a professional stream also took some liberal arts. And, gee, you're in computer science. Maybe you want to take an art course or a design course or a history course or something like that when you're building a website or a way of interacting with and building a collaborative community or a new app or something like that. That stuff is going to help you think big picture. My son did a liberal arts undergraduate degree, and he got hired on Bay Street. And within a year, he was doing the morning briefing to the entire company about what's going on in the world and what we should care about, because he knew about stuff like Asia, because he studied some geography, and he studied some history, and he studied some economics, and so on. And he rose up very, very quickly in that company, and he will tell you it's because of his undergraduate degree, which was in law, social thought, and jurisprudence. And then, he went off and did a CFA, which is like an MBA in finance. And he found it pretty easy to do that because he had the thinking capacity that an undergraduate degree will give you. So I'll stop right there.
No, Don, thank you. I should just tell you one other thing about Don. He's kept his music going. He is now a member of the hardest working band on Bay Street, Men in Suits.
We actually used to do a concert every year, whether our public demanded it or not. But we now got good. Our new song, which I wrote here at Trent, and which I've updated, and it's now a hip-hop song. I can see these young people, like that didn't compute, right? This face in a hip-hop band. But no, it's on iTunes. It's called Morning Light. The band is Men in Suits. 99 cents. It's yours.
Very good. That's a bit expensive.
Well, all of your rap is cheaper, is it, PSV?
Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker comes all the way from the big city of Kincardine.
Close, Kinmount.
And if you go through Kincardine and blink, you might miss it. But I want to tell you about Jennifer Gedman. She's a senior CBC executive. When I was looking at what she is in charge of, I cannot believe, Jennifer, that there's anything else at the CBC to be in charge of. She oversees all factual entertainment, unscripted comedy, live event specials, sports programs, and I must say the CBC did a wonderful job on the recent World Cup. And I heard that on many occasions. She has had 3 Gemini Awards, a Gracie Award, and I found out what a Gracie, I thought it was named after Gracie Fields, but it isn't. That shows the vintage. It is exemplary contribution in electronic media and in electronic media, and it's a continental award. It's given in the States. She was the 211 President's Award winner for excellence in programming, content, and leadership. And if there's anything that comes through her bio, she's passionate about this wonderful country, about Canadian culture and Canadian programming. Jennifer Gedman.
Oh.
And also, so I've got to tell you one other thing. Her mentors at Trent were none other than Stephen Brown and David Glasgow.
Yeah.
And if you can overcome that.
Yes. I'm very happy Stephen's not here because I suspect he'd be heckling me from the audience. Thank you very much for that. I wasn't sure who you were talking about there for a bit. So I have the unenviable position of following the brilliant Dawn Tapscott. I was thinking that I might just say ditto and then pass it back over to Paul, but I thought maybe the organizers wouldn't really like that so much. So I went to plan B, and I'm going to start with a joke. I'm sorry. I'm going to start with a joke. You've probably heard this one. The graduate with a science degree asks, why does it work? The graduate with the engineering degree asks, how does it work? The graduate with the accounting degree asks, how much will it cost? And the graduate with the liberal arts degree asks, do you want fries with that? Yeah. So if you have a liberal arts degree as I do, you've probably heard that one. I heard many of those jokes as I was preparing for this today. But I thought that this joke got at why I'm really happy we're having this conversation, because as Dawn said, there really is this to and fro about, liberal arts degree, it's a waste of time and money, and it's the pursuit of people who are a bit aimless and maybe a little bit clueless. But I think that as the world gets more complex and it's fast-moving and unclear, I think it's critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication that we need in our communities and in our boardrooms. And I think those 4 C's are what you get from a liberal arts education. Last year, I was invited to my daughter's career night. And I was to meet with grade 11 and 12 students who were making their choices about post-secondary education. And I tell you, not one of the girls that I met with ever mentioned a liberal arts degree. In fact, it seemed that some were actively avoiding it. I had so many conversations with these girls who would speak passionately about their love of history or politics or anthropology. But when I'd say, so what are you thinking about for university? Each and every one of them said back to me, oh, well, I'm going to go to business school, which I found very puzzling. So after I heard this time and time again, I grew a little bit frustrated. And finally, I asked one girl who clearly loved English literature, and I said, oh, why business school? Why aren't you going to study literature? And she said, what am I going to do with that? I have to make a living somehow. As Dawn said, I do have sympathy for that. I get that. For a young person, a liberal arts degree can seem like risky business. It's 4 years of your life. I'm not sure how much it costs now, maybe around $50,000. The payoff's not really clear. And to further the risk, as Dawn said, we have a tenuous economy, and it seems like every day we're hearing another story about youth unemployment. So I get the instinct that a targeted education might seem like a better bet. I did my best with these girls. I tried to convince them to do a little bit more thinking about their decisions, to not give up on what you love so soon. And yes, it's shocking but true. English majors can find fulfilling careers. They really can. I like to think I'm one of them. I remember when I was picking my university, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. That was my plan. But I thought, do I want to go straight to journalism school? And thankfully, I knew not to rush that journey. That before I could write about the world, I needed to know a little bit more about it. So for 4 years, I studied philosophy and English literature with David and Stephen, environmental science, politics, and history. And then I went to journalism school at Ryerson. So maybe it took me a little longer, and it cost me a little bit more money. But I think that pairing really served me well. Trent sharpened my critical thinking skills. It cemented me as a lifelong learner, and Ryerson gave me the practical skills to use on the job. 20 some odd years later, my Trent experience is still relevant. I'd say Ryerson not as much now. It served me well during my first years in my career, but with any technical training, especially my industry, technology moves so quickly that you have to keep updating on the job with those changes. For example, when I was at Ryerson, and this is going to age me, we would edit our tape with razor blades and tape. We would actually cut it and paste it back together again. I know I'm a dinosaur. And then I got hired by the CBC, and immediately after, everything went digital. So I was completely learning a new world, and I think the pace of change is even greater now. Now, as for Trent, one might say, okay, how exactly are those studies still helping you today? I mean, really, Jennifer, the study of Samuel Peeps is really helping you in your day-to-day at the CBC, is it? Well, I don't really remember much of Samuel Peeps. Please don't tell Stephen that. I don't. But I do remember being taught to widen my view to see the bigger picture, to critically analyze what I saw, to make connections to create a vision, and to persuade others, mostly Stephen and David, of my vision. And I do use those skills today, both at the macro and micro levels at my job. The Sochi Olympics is a good example that I can share with you. I was fortunate to oversee the Olympics content team. And as we do with all of our content, including the Olympics, we have to create the vision and then the execution plan for what we're going to do. But this one was bigger and more complex than ever before. It was the first time at the CBC we'd operated as one company. So English, French, radio, news, online, all working together as one team. So it meant developing new systems of how we work together, how we create and program our content across all platforms, and then how we communicate to the world what we're up to. It was also the first Olympics to have the iPad, which I know, crazy, I think we've had that thing forever, but it was only invented in 2010. And so what were we gonna do with this thing? Well, we embraced it. We used this new technology as a way of sharing content and engaging our audiences, and we wanted to use it to create an experience that was simple, intuitive, and easy to navigate, and most importantly, so that Canadians would never miss a moment of those Olympic Games. And I would say it was a huge success for us. We offered Canadians 1,500 hours of content. That was double what we did in Torino, and we did it at a reduced budget. And we engaged Canadians on all of our platforms. 33 million Canadians tuned in at some point to watch the Olympic Games, and 1 in 3 watched it on a digital platform. So that was a big shift for us. On a macro level, I would also say that collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity are coming in pretty handy as a leader at the CBC these days. I'm sure you've been reading about us. But I would say, I hope Dawn agrees, that it's not just the CBC, but it's the entire media industry that's facing turbulent times. New technologies are changing, are escalating the pace of change. They're turning the media landscape on its ear. Appointment viewing is eroding, and personalization is the new consumer expectation. So for those of us in the traditional media, there's more and more competition. We're seeing the market flooded with digital competitors like Netflix, YouTube, and iTunes. I bet many of you in this room watch content on one of those or all of those platforms. The landscape didn't look anything like this 5 years ago. I can tell you, because I was there. It's a maze now, and there are no clear road signs even telling you where you currently are, let alone where you need to go. So I'd say more than ever, as a leader, I think we need critical thinkers who thrive in that ambiguity. You can't fight it, you need to embrace it. We need those continuous learners who are agile and adaptable, because the pace of change is not going to slow down. We need those collaborators able to work effectively with people in our own organizations and also in the larger community, because I would say not just in my industry, but elsewhere, partnership is the name of the game. We need innovators, able to connect all the disparate dots to create something fresh and new. And we need clear communicators able to articulate that vision. I'm lucky to have on my small executive team at the CBC many of those types of thinkers. Of course, not all of them are liberal arts graduates, but many of them are. Around the boardroom table at any given time, I could have a smattering of anthropology and some political science, throw in some music and some philosophy, a little psychology. Makes for very interesting meetings for sure. Just this week, one of them passed along an article about creativity and innovation, and I really liked a quote in it, so I wanted to share it with you. In order for us to truly create and contribute to the world, we have to be able to connect countless dots, to cross-pollinate ideas from a wealth of disciplines, to combine and recombine these pieces to build new castles. I worry about a world that pushes us to specialize too early in our education, that will be missing the type of citizens, leaders, and employees we need to help build those new castles. I've been thinking about my daughter's career night ever since it happens. It's still puzzling to me, and I probably have more questions than I do have answers about those girls. I wonder why we can never seem to see the value, why in Canada, why can't we see the value of the liberal arts? Why don't we see its merits? Should we embrace the blending of the liberal arts and the technical training? Is that where we should go? Do we just need a really good PR campaign that communicates it? Do we need a public policy shift? Do we need both? Most importantly, I wonder, what the hell are they putting in the drinking water at my daughter's school that makes everybody want to go into business? I don't know the answer to that yet, but I'll figure that out.
Their parents.
Yes, maybe. My daughter Jane is only 8, so I luckily have some time to figure this out. But I'm going to want to reframe this for her. Maybe she will choose business school or accounting like her father did because she loves it. And hey, that is a great thing. Godspeed. But if she doesn't, and she's more like her mother, then I want to encourage her to see the long game and not the short one, to think more broadly and to resist the temptation to narrow your focus. And most importantly, to ask the right question, which definitely isn't, do you want fries with that? And it also isn't, what am I going to do for a living? It's how can I best contribute? I think that's the right question to ask, and I hope that will help guide her to a successful and meaningful life and career.
I'm sure, Jennifer, I feel very confident about this, that your experience in Trent athletics was a prime reason.
I'm sure. I left that part out, I'm sorry.
It was obviously a part that you omitted.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, our third speaker, Maureen Lower, part of a family that have sent 4 people to Trent and are still going to send more. And I would like to say her mate is in the audience there, and he performed when he was at Trent in a number of Gilbert and Sullivans. I would like to say that they met backstage. I don't think they did, but if they'd have been backstage, they would have met. Maureen spent 20 years in financial management and then joined George Brown College in Toronto as the Dean of the Centre for Business. Just to put George Brown in perspective, they have 30,000 students, they have 60,000 part-time students, and if you relate that to Trent, that would take 3 decades for us to reach that level of 60,000. She also would seem to me to have been responsible for developing practically everything that George Brown has developed over the last decade. And I would list them. The opening of the new School of Financial Services, the building of the Centre for Performing Arts, responsible for developing the Institute of Entrepreneurship and Community Innovation. There can't be much left to develop. So Maureen, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Maureen Lower.
Thanks very much, Paul. Actually, I started my career at George Brown as Dean of Business, Arts and Design, a very unusual portfolio. We've recently had a reorg, so I have kept the business portfolio, and now I just go out to support all those talented arts and design students at their special events. I've taken a little bit of a different approach. I'm going to read my remarks. It's been a really interesting exercise for me to do some research about the value of a liberal arts education, especially because I'm a liberal arts graduate and I'm so immersed in business programming. So let me begin by saying that for every anecdote about the person who became successful, even rich and famous, starting out with a degree in philosophy, there is one about the liberal arts grad working as a barista. Why baristas show up so often in these stories is a mystery. Perhaps a sociology major will do a thesis on this at some point in time. There are a host of articles and blogs in defense of the liberal arts and innumerable commencement addresses built around the unscientific but strongly held personal beliefs of the writer. In addition, a lot of what's written, especially by the critics, speaks interchangeably about liberal arts education, post-secondary education, and university education, which really isn't helpful. And interestingly, college post-secondary education appears to be getting an easier ride. So I wanted to try and stack up the arguments for and against a liberal arts education to try and understand them better, and to get beneath the values-driven statements and the knee-jerk responses. So I tried to park my own beliefs, both as a liberal arts grad and also as a dean in the Ontario college system. And I sampled a few dozen articles, and I think I identified the main points on both sides, some of their strengths, some of their weaknesses, but most important for me is that I think I can see a bit of a way forward, a third way I would call it, neither pro nor con, that to me is much more useful. What can be said about the overall quality of the pro and anti-liberal arts literature? It's argued that the critics of liberal arts education use reductive metrics, that they've based their critique on a narrow analysis of return on investment. Return on investment in this case being post-graduation earnings versus the cost of education, including post-graduation debt. Is this a fair assessment of the criticism? Maybe the critics are actually onto something. Maybe they're missing the point. The supporters can sound equally narrow, typically citing the value of being well-rounded, having a capacity for critical thinking, good citizenship, and other qualities that can be very difficult to measure and substantiate. Someone called this a squishy defense of the squishy subjects. This defense is also a little unfair to the employment-focused programs, I think. It implies that they don't teach critical thinking, and that one can't be well-rounded with a commerce degree. Andrew Potter, writing in Maclean's in May 2010, said this is how not to defend a liberal arts education. So supporters sometimes appear to be avoiding meeting the critics on the critics' terms. Are they doing justice to their cause? Can they in fact make a good dollars and cents argument? The critics cite the case of grads working 2 part-time service jobs to pay off their big student debts. The champions cite the leaders in technical fields who say that the engineers and others who advanced into their companies into positions of influence are those who've gained the soft skills, the kind they get from a liberal arts education. This last example is indicative of the third way that I mentioned, that I've been finding in my reading leading up to today's panel discussion. The combination of both types of education, liberal arts and professional or career-specific education, is frequently cited, directly or indirectly, as the best possible option. This might be the rocket scientist who rose to leadership in her cohort because, unlike her peers, she learned how to play the cello. And it makes me think of the metaphor of the samurai who, having mastered swordsmanship and the ways of war, completes his training by dropping all that and studying calligraphy or flower arranging. Equally, to my mind, this might be the university grad who later enrolls in a community college to learn a specialization or a marketable trade. It may yet emerge as a consensus that the pro-anti debate is a waste of time and that this hybrid education is the gold standard. But first, let's look a little more at the pro and con arguments. First, a common concern that we've heard a lot about today is that there are just too many unemployed and underemployed liberal arts grads with skills that don't meet immediate labor market needs. According to Linda Franklin, who is president of Colleges Ontario, there's a gap that exists between the job-specific skills held by job seekers and the skills needed by employers. The Conference Board of Canada recently found that this gap is large enough to cost the Ontario economy $24 billion a year. However, there is evidence that a liberal arts education has value in the labor market, and this is based on actual employment rates of graduates. David Naylor, former president of the University of Toronto, in a 2013 speech to the Empire Club, hardly an audience to be swayed by mere rhetoric, said, "If you examine employment levels by program, 6 months after graduation, it turns out that the humanities and other arts and science graduates are finding jobs as quickly as computer science graduates. After 2 years, it pretty much levels out." He noted that in 2009, dentistry held the high ground at nearly 100% employment after 6 months, and forestry was at the low end being just above 80%. And what was in the middle of the pack? Humanities and business, neck and neck. Alan Rock, president of the University of Ottawa, in a speech last year, noted that 95% of his arts and science grads were employed within 6 months, and that 81% of them said that their full-time jobs were related to their degrees. That one may go to the supporters. A second concern is that initial post-graduation earnings are lower for liberal arts majors than in other programs. This one seems to go to the critics. Liberal arts grads do earn less than grads from other disciplines, at least first starting out in their first jobs. A 2011 survey of graduates from Ontario undergraduate programs in 2009 showed that engineering grads made an average of just over $60,000 a year, social science grads earned about $43,000, and humanities grads earned about $39,000. And a recent study by the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission showed that 2 years after graduation, that region's liberal arts grads were also earning the least and were less likely to have jobs that require a degree. But the earnings gap shrinks over time. The Association of American Colleges and Universities recently analyzed 2010-11 data on both earnings trajectories and career pathways, and they compared liberal arts with a number of subjects, including science, math, engineering, business, and education. They found that unemployment rates are low for undergrad liberal arts grads and decline over time. They also found that at peak earnings ages, from 50 to 60 years of age, those who majored in humanities or social sciences earned about $2,000 more a year than those who majored in professional or pre-professional programs. Third is the charge that the enrollment in liberal arts is dropping. In Ontario in 2011, registration for job-focused programs such as business grew by nearly 3%, while arts registration declined by 0.3%. There appears to be a trend here. Stats Canada reported that for the 15 years from 1992 to 2007, the proportion of graduates in humanities moved downwards from about 13 to 11%. Similarly, from 2006 to 2010, as reported by the Ontario University's Application Centre, first-year enrollments in humanities, social sciences, and fine arts dropped by 5% a year, while business and commerce increased by 12%. And yet, even with this decline, graduates in social and behavioral sciences and law make up the largest category of graduates in Ontario, at 22% in 1992, and still 20% in 2007. So it appears that the popularity of liberal arts may indeed be slowing down, but not likely to end anytime soon. Fourth and last, employers and policymakers are looking for employment-specific skill sets, allegedly not taught in the liberal arts. Sometimes this is expressed in pretty radical ways. For instance, a 2012 task force assembled by the governor of Florida suggested that students in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, should pay less tuition than arts and science students. And here in Canada, as Don mentioned in his opening remarks, the Globe and Mail reported just this spring that the government of British Columbia, in its restructuring of post-secondary education, will shift funding for universities and colleges towards instruction for occupations in which there are critical shortages, mainly in the trades, plumbing, carpentry, etc. Not surprisingly, the presidents of 2 of BC's major universities warned about an assault by the government on a classic liberal arts education. There is certainly a sense that outside of the academy, skills not specifically relevant to the current labor market are being devalued. Time magazine in 2012 reported that while 62% of US university administrators included to learn to think critically as the first or second most important reason for the reason people go to college, that only 26% of the public agreed with that statement. An obvious disconnect. In fact, employers do need and value the skills that a liberal arts education delivers. This is borne out by the feedback from employers themselves. A recent survey of CEOs in the US showed 74% of them would recommend a liberal arts education to students. And Forbes magazine last year surveyed employers about the top 10 skills they need. They included proficiency with computers and technical knowledge related to the job, as you might expect, but they also included the ability to work in a team, solve problems, communicate ideas, analyze and process information, and so on. All easily part of most liberal arts programs. My college's own regular research of employers within the GTA consistently shows similar results. Interpersonal and intercultural competencies are important to their business success and to their decision in hiring new employees. So the so-called soft skills seem to be maintaining their value in the eyes of employers. So this covers most of the debate as I saw it in my review of the topic. So I'd like to move on for just a couple of minutes to where all this may be heading. And what I'm left with is a strong sense that there's a better way to put all of this together. And it has something to do with the merits of appreciating various types of education. I think we may soon tire of this pro-anti debate in which neither side has scored a decisive win. I think we might find it more useful to take seriously the critiques of liberal arts education, but not be lured into a defensive response. For most of us, in the relatively measurable terms of how best to start and maintain a rewarding career, the answer is clearly, to me, a bit of liberal arts education and a bit of technical education. In a former career, I was involved in financial planning, and one thing I learned was that no portfolio should ever include only one kind of investment. And as an employer who's hired hundreds of people over the years, I can't honestly say I would not hire first on the basis of the hard-edged requirements of the job. But as an anthro major who's been fortunate enough to make a career far from what I originally studied, I can also say I always had an ear and an eye out for other skills and personal gifts that make up the whole employee. And I've been pretty good at recruiting talent over all these years. I like to think it's important to step back to really understand why this argument is happening in the first place. If you trace back the humanities to the humanist education that propelled the Renaissance from the 14th century, it's really been a remarkably durable tradition. My way of understanding this is that what we're seeing is not actually a weakening of the value of a liberal arts education at all, but a higher demand for technical skills. One of the reasons why a BA used to be a ticket to a job, aside from the fact that they were relatively scarce, is that employers used to develop and train their recruits. Canadian employers are increasingly leaving this up to employees and to colleges and universities as they fall behind their global counterparts in investment in workplace training. The related trend called creeping credentialism only adds to this pressure. The problem is that the vessel is bursting. There's only so much education, liberal arts or otherwise, that can fit into the 3 or 4 years after high school and before one is expected to start their career. And there's obviously pressure on that precious window as the cost of post-secondary education for the student goes up. Maybe liberal arts education is not getting devalued as much as it's getting squished out of its traditional stage of life. Here's another angle. Maybe the drive for the knowledge of the love of learning is something that shouldn't be played out substantially before your 25th birthday anyway. We're all familiar with the benefits of lifelong learning. Maybe the best time for liberal arts education will be spaced out in the future into repeated short bursts over the lifespan instead of a post-adolescent marathon. There are rafts of people in continuing education at all ages, studying all kinds of things, including career upgrading skills. But a lot of that fits within liberal arts. And they're not just retirees taking balcony container gardening. At U of T, a full 70% of continuing education students are in mid-career. They even have a course called, and I am not kidding you, The Meaning of Life. It doesn't get any more liberal arts education than that. Another observation, this one from my own experience in the college system, relates to pathways to employment and education over the career trajectory. Some of you may be surprised at how many university graduates are actually choosing to combine both university and college credentials in order to become job ready. Over the 5 years from 2008 to 2013, there was a 40% increase in the number of university graduates applying to college. A growing number of these grads, especially liberal arts grads, decide to enroll immediately after finishing their university degrees or within a couple of years, after they work for a couple of years. The credential called a graduate certificate requires a previous diploma or a university degree. It's typically a year long, providing specialized knowledge in a certain field. It frequently offers cooperative education or some other form of experiential education, and it's usually moderately priced at about $3,600 a year. Graduates from this credential are earning the highest salaries on average among all college credentials at nearly $41,000, 6 months after graduation, which is about a 5% bump from the average earnings for university liberal arts grads. This seems to me to be the best of all possible worlds for academically strong students, gaining the benefits of a university liberal arts education and then making the transition to the world of work through a specialized program of study at a college. Maybe the critics are right that the short-term payback of liberal arts education, both in earnings and employment opportunity, have been weakened, but they're not right about the value of liberal arts education over the longer term. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've really enjoyed researching this topic and contemplating such an interesting subject and sharing my thoughts with you today. I think it drew a lot on the comments that I heard in the Q&A this morning about the future of a university education, and certainly my fellow speakers on the panel this afternoon. Thank you.
Our final speaker of the afternoon is Justin Chu. Now, Justin Chu is the Executive Director of Chung Kong Holdings Limited. And to put this in its right perspective, Chung Kong Holdings Limited is the flagship of Chung Kong Group, the Chung Kong Group, which is a multinational corporate conglomeration in 52 countries and 280,000 employees. And this is the boss. He has been described, and I quote again, as the most inspirational and innovative developer that Hong Kong has ever known. And if you've ever been to Hong Kong, which I haven't, there's an immense amount of development. Also, Justin has been a very generous philanthropist to this institution and very wisely put his money into an athletic facility. would say that when I heard him sort of at the opening, he said that he wanted to put his money into a facility that would benefit both the university and the city. And the reason he wanted to do that was because both the university and the city gave him such a warm welcome in 1973 when he arrived here. Just one other interesting fact. A couple of years ago, Justin was awarded an honorary degree from Trent. When he was awarded that degree, it was the first time that he was able to graduate physically on stage. Because when he graduated in 1977, he had to leave because his family could not afford to keep him here for the extra length of time. And I think, Justin, you've come a hell of a long way. Dr. Justin Chu.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Actually, I was talking to Paul just now before this section that, since I'm the last panelist to be speaking this afternoon, and especially after the three very outstanding panelists have already spoken, there's actually not much left for me to speak about. So can I be excused? But Paul said, no, you fly 15 hours here, so you better say something. So here I am, I can't escape, so here I am. But actually, I thought that my contribution to this discussion might really focus on the liberal arts learning of the part of the world I'm most familiar with, that is Asia. As a Chinese by birth, I have always held a fascination of the many creations of the ancient Chinese and how they have contributed to shaping not only China, but also the rest of the world. China has been touted as one of the four great Asian civilizations of mankind. The invention and discoveries of ancient China has enabled the inhabitants in our part of the world to flourish, multiply, and conquer many challenges of nature. Equally fascinating is the non-material manifestation of Chinese thought and ideas, the many schools of thought in ancient China. The beginning of traditional Chinese school begins with 100 schools of thought. That came into existence during the spring and autumn period and the roaring state period of ancient China, if you all know about Chinese history, which lasted from the 6th century to 221 BCE. Well, the next slide, please. I don't have the remote, so I have to rely on our technician.
It's a problem.
Well, because we are talking about liberal arts, we don't need all this technology, right? We would rather use human skill. Okay, as you can see from here, all these major 100 schools of thought from ancient China, actually, they do not train people how to get a job. No, because liberal arts, you do not train people how to get a job, right? But actually, they train people how to become a true human being. They train people to be creative, critical, and to think out of the box in a much broader perspective. I have a script here later on if you like to read it, because it's a bit blurry here. But how can we do that? Maybe the next slide. Yep. The Chinese schools of thought are often inextricably bounded to the period in which they flourished, and they like like their Western counterpart, they were often conceived out of social and political needs of the time. Those among us who frequent the bookstores would have little difficulties noticing the increasing number of books boosting classical Chinese themes that feature most prominently in the self-help and business and management sections. Many of the books will include their title, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Some will indulge secrets of business success divined from I Ching hexagrams, the center one. And yet other secrets of business success lessons from Tao Te Ching, And this one, there's a rule of law. Regardless of whatever bold claim, such books like it is abundantly clear that ancient Chinese thoughts are again picking up momentum, at least superficially on a worldwide scale nowadays. And as I put it, the liberal arts education in the Chinese thought is actually the art of sustainability. It's right down there. You know. Can we move this up? Maybe you need to stand up. You know? So beyond the consumer-driven fascination of such ancient wisdom, there's a very real-world reference for why scholars, students, and businesses around the world could look to Chinese wisdom for ideas that could change the way they conceptualize and interact with the world. Combining my background from a Chinese family and the experience interacting with people in my line of work, I propose that Chinese, and by extension Asian, values that are rooted in traditional schools of thought will be helpful in addressing some of the pressing issues that are plaguing developed and developing societies around the world these days. Just to quote a few examples, OH welfare and social security. I was talking to our new president this morning about the problem we are facing with social security here in Canada, that there's just not enough money to be distributed. With the advancement in healthcare and enhanced longevity, the constantly enlarging population of elderly people is one of our most pressing social issues. And for many nations, expenditures in OH welfare and retirement security constitutes an annual expenditure that breaks a new record every year. It is a trend that started in the later half of the last century, since the boom of nuclear family in Europe and the US, and since then the pace of modernization and urbanization has steadily built up in the rest of the world, with children moving away from home as they got married. Often to other cities or states, the parents, like us, entering OH, are left to fend for themselves, either financially or in coping with basic household activities as we go aged, and sometimes both. By contrast, in China and also in many Asian countries, including Japan, the issue of OH welfare has manifested much less acutely because the children in these cultures are often ingrained with a sense of duty to exercise filial piety. The concept of filial piety is traceable to the earliest Chinese classics. In the classics of filial piety, a book recording dialogues between Confucius, whom a lot of you may have heard of, and his students. Confucius said, in serving his parents, a filial son reverts them in daily life. He makes them happy while he nourishes them. He takes anxious care of them in sickness. He shows great sorrow over the death that was for him, and he sacrificed to them with solemnity. In a modern society, such act of filial piety manifests in such aspect as living under the same roof or in close proximity with one's aged parents, so that they can be given adequate care, paying for their household upkeep and medical expenses, and in general, involving them in family activities. Of course, as parents, this is our dream, right? But such a relationship, beyond ethical consideration, is also a practical concern, as it helps to cut down vastly the need for OH welfare. That is what is practiced in most Asian countries nowadays. Rather than relying on government support, retired persons can find livelihood and emotional security in those closest to them, that is, to live together with their children. This constitutes a highly effective as well as sustainable cycle of social welfare that will help to cut down drastically on social security expenses and potentially physical and mental health risk that would otherwise threaten OH households. This modern This model of parent-child reciprocation, I believe, is one of the developed society, both in the West and in Asia world, would do well to borrow from. The second sharing we have is on the overspending and consumerization. Excess overspending, both symptoms of consumerization, are among the severest of social issues that modern societies have seen. Examples are plenty from the ills of excess and overspending, arguably the source of many of the modern society's problems: pollution of environment, shortage of resources, and individual and even national financial crisis. One need only to look at the staggering national debt of the largest capitalist economy in the world, the United States of America. By comparison, Asian nations are generally financially sound, often boosting robust government coffers with deep reserves and enable them to weather the severest of financial storms. Such a difference, I argue, rooted in the difference between Asian and Western values about saving. In China, there used to be this saying, one becomes rich through savings up. And though it's no longer quite true in a world of low interest rate, and where investment of assets is the only way to protect them from depreciation, the core idea, thriftiness, is one that individuals in developed societies should do well to follow. Confucius once said, "He who will not be economized will have to agonize." Moxie also said, "By being thrifty, one thrifts. By indulging in excess, one embraces destruction." All sages of Chinese classical thought, each following from a different path of argument, advocates one core culture, thriftiness, in Chinese, Jian. It is perhaps time that the Western world, as well as the materialistic younger generation in our own Asian societies, look to such traditional values for solutions of our current problems. But cutting down on expenses will be a solid step towards climbing out from financial pit the world has dug for itself. So the third wisdom I want to share with the audience here today is Jinzi and personal integrity. The idea of Jinzi, meaning gentleman. Jinji in Chinese means gentleman. Yet another central idea of ancient Chinese thought that is now part and parcel of how many Asians conduct themselves. In a word used by Confucius to describe the ideal man. And yes, while Confucius may only have been thinking of men, these are principles that do not depend on gender, and can be embodied by anyone. There are many characteristics of a Jinji. He can live in poverty, he does more and speaks less. He is loyal, obedient, and knowledgeable, and above all, he possesses a sense of integrity. Though times are different and many of the qualities of Jinji, blindly loyalty, conformance, and social hierarchy are no longer considered desirable, many of the moral qualities remain relevant. One may question whether in these days and age of cutthroat competitions and maximization of personal interests, is being a Jinji really desirable, particularly in the commercial world. My experience is that precisely because of developments in modern world, being a Jinji is now even more important than ever. The world is an increasingly global place, and dealing across national boundaries while governed by the international and local laws are often fraught with risk. As business becomes increasingly globalized and small internet-based startups are slated to be the next big thing, the value of personal integrity becomes highly desirable, precisely precisely because in the internet age, it only takes one act of misconduct to ruin one's reputation. Conversely, by displaying integrity in your every deal, your reputation as a jinji gets circulated with equal speed, winning your trust and business. When one seeks not maximization of profits, but satisfaction of the other party, business naturally flourishes. These examples are but a fraction of what we can draw from the wisdom of the Chinese schools of thought. Technology has helped us conquer nature. Economics has helped some parts of the world prosper. Yet, not without significant cost. Liberal arts education has seen a comeback precisely because the academic world acknowledged that the disproportionate pursuit of certain aspects of knowledge does not make us better humans or the world a better place. The examples I have given, the lack of care for the old, consumerization, mistrust, are cases in point. Perhaps it's time to look for a clue from a place where for many millennia a balance has been struck between knowing and living, between nature and human profit. I will conclude with a quote from my favorite Chinese thinker, Zhuzi. Only those who are absolutely sincere can fully develop their nature. If they can fully develop their nature, they can then fully develop the nature of others. If they can fully develop the nature of others, they can then fully develop the nature of things. If they can fully develop the nature of things, they can then assist in the transforming and nourishing process of heaven and earth. If they can assist in the transforming and nourishing the process of heaven and earth, they can just form a trinity with heaven and earth. In Chinese, we call it heaven, earth, and man. 天地人, heaven, earth, and man. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Very intriguing.